Business Growth Talks podcast is created and hosted by Mark Haywood. In this show, we talk about how to grow a business in the growth stage. The growth stage is often marked by rapid developments, increased revenue, and an escalating customer base. In each episode, we talk to entrepreneurs and business owners who have grown businesses, and we cover topics like scaling processes, market expansion, financial management, human resource and talent development, and customer retention. If you are looking for actionable advice, tips, and techniques on how to grow, run and build your business, this is the podcast for you.
Today we have Ben Guttmann, who is a marketing entrepreneur, educator, and writer. Ben started Digital Native Group in 2011, where he built the digital agency. He started the company working with a local ice cream parlor and grew into partnerships with NFL, Comcast, and NBC Universal. He sold that business in 2021. He is also a lecturer at Baruch College teaching digital advertising. He also has a book upcoming for release in October 2020, which is called Simply Put, Why Clear Messages Win and How to Design Them. This book is an instruction manual of helping people share simple but effective messages. And Ben lives in New York. Before we go into it, please can you subscribe to the podcast? It is on all the platforms. And if you do that, you won't miss an episode. Thank you, Ben. Thank you for joining me today. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Good. Are you good?
Doing great. I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. Right. The first question that I ask all of my guests is, what does a business mindset mean to you?
So it's funny you asked that, because that is a conversation that I have with my students every semester. So you mentioned I teach at Baruch College. Yeah. And one weird thing about that is I'm an adjunct. I've been there for about 10 years, and I teach on Monday evenings. And what always happens, because it's an evening class, is that I get a number of students for whom I am the last person they will ever have in a classroom. I'm the last teacher, I'm the last professor before they go out there. And I try to instill upon them this idea of, as you're describing, a business mindset, which is there's no escalator anymore. If you are in their shoes and you're about to graduate undergraduate college, every day, every month, every year, every semester, it follows the same pattern. Unless you hop off or get pushed off, you're going to be doing the next thing. When you graduate, the escalator stops. And what you do with that is your business mindset. If you're saying, hey, I can at that moment go and find somehow to create value in the world and to receive value back for it. If I can go and say there's problems that I want to solve. If there's things that I want to do, people I want to meet, people I want to help, all of those things are a business mindset. It's about having this problem-solving view of the world instead of it being, well, what's the next thing that's on the schedule for me? What's the next thing that's on this escalator?
Yeah, it's that whole thing. Like, university is a long time since I was there, but coming out of university, I was completely unprepared for real life, for work and business and stuff. So I feel that I'm being validated that you're asking your students that. So that's great. Look, tell me one thing about your upbringing which reflects on who you are today.
Oh boy. So I was very fortunate to live in a household where nobody really had a job. They all made their own jobs. My mother growing up was a social worker. My father growing up was an attorney. They were independent professionals. My grandfather on my father's side ran a Jewish deli in New York. And before that, his father ran a grocery store back in Czechoslovakia. And before that, there was a farmer. And on my mother's side, my grandfather was a psychiatrist with his own practice. And what was interesting about that was that I never had the pressure to say, well, okay, you have to follow that specific path. You have to go and you have to go get the job, and then you have to go work for 10 years and you have to go get a promotion. You have to go retire and get your little gold watch, because nobody did that. There were no models of that in my life. And I just thought that was normal. But then when you look at kind of the statistics, when you look at people you meet throughout your life, most people will follow that path. They'll go on that escalator, as I said before. And there's nothing wrong with that. Those are different people have different paths and different things they want to do. But I am very grateful to have had the experience that when I did graduate college, when I did want to start my marketing agency, I didn't have a chorus of people back at like Thanksgiving or other holidays saying, hey, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Why are you starting your own thing? That's weird. Shouldn't you just go get a job instead? I didn't have that kind of like little pinpricks over again. And it's hard to overstate how fortunate that situation is.
So my upbringing is the complete opposite. So my family were workers. They all had, my father had a corporate job. My mother worked at a school, and it was like the daily grind. And I just to give you a background, and my audience already heard this many times before, I worked in corporate for 12 or 13 years and gave it up to become an entrepreneur. But it was that conversation you have like at Sunday lunches or like holidays where my family would be like, well, what job are you doing? Like, how's the job going?
Yeah.
So when I started doing it on my own and doing my own thing, there was a great deal of confusion about like, well, what do you do? So I totally respect, and I love the idea of having like that family, and hopefully like me and my wife, she's a therapist, I'm a business owner, entrepreneur, and I'm really hoping that when their kids grow up, get educated, go to university if you want to, but afterwards don't necessarily jump on that treadmill, the rat race straight away. Like, think about your options. Think about what you can actually do, what you're good at, what you're passionate about, what you want to do, rather than, as I was taught, go get a job, do the job, get promoted. You'll get everything you want if you get promoted. So it's an interesting contrast for my upbringing. So thank you for sharing that with me. I want to go straight into your book. So your book is released. Today is the 19th of September. This will be released in a few weeks. Your book is coming out in October. Tell me about it.
Oh, yeah. So as you mentioned before, so I ran a marketing agency for 10 years. I teach marketing. And through all of those experiences, and as well as my personal life, I was just being a user of the world. I saw that so many people and so many clients, so many groups have such a hard time communicating clearly. And that's why they would hire a marketing agency a lot of times, right? That's to have us go and cut through everything and find the message that sells and then get it out to people. While we understood how to do that, I was always curious, well, why is that? Why is it that some messages work, some messages break for the noise, others don't? And after I sold my business, I was still curious about this. And so I started investigating it. And I said, well, it turns out that we have this bias towards complication, that when we are faced with a problem or faced with a message that we have to communicate, we will tend to add instead of subtract. We'll tend to hide behind bigger language. We'll tend to avoid the big messages that cut through. And the science backs us up, and we see it all the time, but we prefer to needle around in the details instead of the big challenges. We're incentivized by all the systems and reward structures around us to do that. But the problem is that's exactly the opposite of what makes for effective communication, which is ultimately simplicity. The messages that work, the messages that are the most informative, that are the most persuasive, are simple. And that's what the book is about. I joke in the beginning of the book that it's a 208-page book about how to say things simply. It sounds like I didn't take my own advice. But the thing is, once, like a lot of things, once you peel back the covers, peel underneath the hood there's a lot that goes on in terms of how it can get simple.
It's really fascinating because you're absolutely right. When you're looking at marketing companies or in politics, often messages that come out that are simple and clear are the ones that resonate. And often with politicians, they repeat that quote, that sort of like mantra that they talk. And I'm thinking Obama did something similar, and Donald Trump did something similar. So what is that? How does someone who's thinking about their marketing and their message for a business owner, how do they get something that works for them, that for an advertising purposes or a marketing purposes is clear, concise, and will hopefully resonate with their target market?
So you mentioned Obama, you mentioned Trump. It's funny, I do mention both of them in the book as examples. And so opposite sides of the political spectrum, both very effective communicators in their own distinct ways. And both of them do a good job of hitting different parts of the 5 principles that I identify in the book. So the first one is beneficial. Why does your message matter to the receiver? What's in it for them? Right? That's number 1. Then we go to focused, which is, are you trying to say one thing or are you trying to say multiple things at once? You can only say, priority is singular, right? You can only say one thing at a time. Salient, number 3, does your message stand out from the noise? Does it rise to the level of attention? Is it contrast to the background? And we talk about constraints and how they can help you in that chapter. Empathetic is the 4th one. Are you speaking in a language that the audience, that the receiver understands? Do you have their actual needs and interests at heart? Are you communicating at the same level as them? That's where that's where we're talking about empathy. And then finally, minimal, which is, have you cut out everything that is not important and focused on what is important? And this is last for a reason, because it's about having everything you need, but only what you need. You have to identify what it is that you need in there and then get rid of everything else that's a distraction otherwise.
So something which I didn't realize I didn't realize that it was actually a thing. So when I'm explaining things to people, I often package them in 3s. So I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but if I'm giving an example of something, I'll put them in multiples of 3s. And then I was on a webinar with this branding expert advertising guy, and he said it's an actual strategy because the brain looks for those 3 multiples. Is that something that you cover? Is that something you're aware of?
Oh, yeah. So I use that rhetorical device a ton in the book, actually, which is you do X, Y, and Z as an example for something, right? I remember sitting there as I'm writing the book being like, okay, I have 2 really good ones. Then racking my brain to try to figure out what the third one is and something. You don't want to put something in that doesn't make sense. You don't want to put something in that's just filling out stuff to fill out the 3. But you are right. There is this kind of magic to the 3. People say 7 also has some sort of magic. It just is kind of like pleasing to the ear. And it's funny because that sounds like it might not be focused to say, like, examples such as X, Y, and Z sounds like you're saying 3 things, but you are saying one thing. And what you're really doing, because it's pleasing to the ear, because it is something that we're predisposed to notice and to call out, you're being minimal at that point. Because when we talk about minimal, it's easy to think that means that this is the fewest number of words, the fewest number of slides, the fewest number of pages on your website. But what we really mean is, what is the least amount of friction? How can you minimize the amount of friction in your message? And sometimes having more words, sometimes having more paragraphs, more space is a smoother, less friction experience than otherwise. And so you mentioned kind of those rules of 3 is definitely one of them. And then another thing, just to throw out, my background is in design, and which is why the book is called Why Clear Messages Win and How to Design Them, is there is also this magic a lot of times if in groups of odd numbers. And so 3, 5, 7, if you're arranging elements, sometimes that's a little bit more interesting than just having the grid there.
So what's your favorite example? If you were to think of whether it's from business, politics, culture, society, entertainment, what for you is the simplest, clearest, if we got a message, which one works best for you?
So I'll give you a couple. I'll give you I have different examples for different pieces, and because I like to highlight ones that are really clarifying about that individual principle. But so I'm here in New York, and if you go back a few decades, we had a mayor named Ed Koch, who was like this really gregarious, personal life character, and his administration in the Department of Transportation put up signs where there's no parking that said, "Don't even think about parking here." That was the street sign. Instead of it being like no parking Monday for Friday, loading vehicles, all these different things, it was don't even think about parking here. And it was a great example of something that was simple across a lot of different things. It's focused. You're only saying one thing. It's salient. It's different. But what's also interesting about it is it goes to one of the other underlying truths here, which is it was a message that is kind, but not necessarily nice. Nice is kind of surface level, right? Nice is saying, I want to be polite, I have decorum, I care about keeping everything copacetic. Kind is about caring about the outcomes. It's about caring about the actual well-being of the receiver, of the people that you're interacting with. And those signs that have a lot of kind of, wishy-washy, don't think about no parking this time for this time, they're not necessarily, they're kind, they're nice, but the kind message is, this is black and white. Don't even think about parking here. That's one that I love. And so you don't see those on the street anymore because it's been a few decades, but you can still buy that sign. I don't know how many road signs, how many parking signs out there have merch, but you can still buy that sign from the Department of Transportation, which is interesting. Also, they had a sequel to that sign, which is, oh man, it just came to me at the moment, but if it comes back to me, I'll pull it up.
I'm just thinking to myself, I might try and buy that sign and put it on top of my sofa or something like that. Put it on the wall on my sofa, saying that just to see who actually looks at it and questions it. It could be quite fun.
Oh man. I have the sequel here. It was no parking, no standing, no stopping, no kidding. And it was like how many road signs get sequels? And that's an important piece. But on a more kind of like marketing note, if you're looking for one, I think one of the most effective marketing messages of all time is you can go back a couple decades. The new iPhone's coming out right now, and Apple's going to go sell a bajillion of them. It's the most popular product of all time. The iPhone has made more money in terms of revenue and in terms of profit than any other product that anybody's ever made. But this resurgence all started with the iPod, and the iPod comes out 20 years ago, and they introduce a product with a very simple marketing message: 1,000 songs in your pocket.
It's brilliant.
1,000 songs. Well, there's a benefit right there, right? You're not telling me it's got 4 gigs or 8 gigs or whatever other sizing. You're telling me what I get out of it. It's 1,000 songs in your pocket. It's direct, it's clear, it comes through, especially when you contrast that with something like what Microsoft has done. And they launched a number of MP3 players, the Zune in particular, over the years. And they also had the careen from message to message as part of it. But one of them is like music the way it wants to be. Okay, that sounds like a nice thing you write on like a whiteboard somewhere. But if you're the receiver, if you're seeing that in a magazine ad, you're hearing that from somebody giving a sales pitch somewhere, what the hell does that mean? It doesn't mean anything, music the way it wants to mean. You're not telling me what the benefits are of your product. You're just telling me some sing-songy words that will fill the space that you need.
Who is this book directed towards?
So this book, it will live on a marketing shelf at the bookstore. I fully anticipate that a lot of marketers are going to really appreciate it. But it's really for anybody who's a leader in any capacity. You could be an entrepreneur, you could be a political leader, you could be an advocate, you could be a faith leader, you could be a family relationship expert. Anybody who is looking to inform and persuade. I talk about in the beginning of the book that this is in some ways translating some stuff that a lot of marketers know for a little bit more of a general audience sometimes, because we're all marketers now. Everybody is deputized in terms of getting people to do something. If that is trying to get your kids to go to soccer practice, if that is trying to get your city council to build a bike lane somewhere, all of us are doing some sort of advocacy and marketing in our own lives. And it's important that we do that well, because that if we don't, bad things happen. Bad communication is the number one cited reason for divorce. It's the number one cited reason for medical errors, number one cited reason for aviation crashes. Some of those are very extreme examples, but when we don't communicate, it hurts all of us. And so that's what this book is about. How do you craft a message that actually breaks through?
Okay. So let's, when is the book released, by the way?
The book comes out from Baruch College Publishers on October 10th, 2023, and it's available wherever books are sold.
Perfect. Right, let's go on to your company, Digital Native Group. So what inspired you to start a digital agency?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hi, I'm Alex, the host of X Health Show. Meet the future of healthcare. Think X-Men, that's X Health. Actual superheroes behind programming living cells to cure cancer once and for all. Tech that detects preterm delivery in seconds, brain-computer interface, or apps that employ AI to match you, your disease, with the best treatment. X Health Show brings to you visionaries who push the boundaries of healthcare from Switzerland, the heart of Europe and the most innovative country in the world. Let me introduce you to their startups. Head to X Health Show, meet the future of healthcare. Happy to greet you there.
I mentioned before that I didn't have linear career path background in my lived experience. And I'm in college and I am about to graduate, and I've spent all my time kind of being a student government dork, and I was really focused on that. But then so I didn't have my internships. I didn't have all my applications together. But fortunately, I had an old professor who also ran a marketing agency, basically came up to me and a friend and said, well, I know you want to start a business. We need some help with digital. Maybe we can figure something out. And so we met with him and his partner a couple of times. We drove up out of the city to their suburban office, and we slapped our logo on the wall in the basement, and bit by bit started to figure things out. We worked with their clients a little bit, but they had like Fortune 500 big name brands, and we were a bunch of knuckleheaded 22-year-olds, and so we didn't really know what we were doing. And so we worked a little bit on those things, but there wasn't as much of a fit. And so at the top of the call, you mentioned like the local ice cream shop. And so we started getting business like that. We would be in the ice cream shop in town there, and they would need help with their email. And we would go back and set up their Google accounts for them and whatever it was. And then that led to a website, and then that led to something else, and that led to something else. And so you started to cut your teeth doing these smaller things bit by bit, and eventually it starts to turn into bigger stuff.
So what's interesting about your story is that you sold your company. And something I had Dawn Bloomer, who hasn't been released yet, but will be released in due course. She's helps people exit strategy businesses. And what came up when I was talking to her was that it's important to have an exit plan before you start. So when you started and you were helping the ice cream parlor, was there an ambition to build it to a certain size and then sell it? Or was the ambition to perhaps run it for the rest of your life?
So we didn't have a very clear black and white plan of, we want to do this for this many years, we want to make this much money, we want to have this type of client, and then we're going to sell it at this date. We did have a general intention of it not being something that we did forever. It was the first thing I did basically right out of school. It was a lot of fun. It was a great thing to do right out of school. I really loved it. But we always had somewhere in the back of our minds that we wanted to probably exit it at some point. We wanted to maybe professionalize it, hire somebody under us and go run it and just be an owner. Maybe it was merge with somebody, maybe it was sell it. So there was always that idea, but there was never like a black and white plan for it. I like to think about Mike Tyson a lot, which is, everybody has a plan until I punch him in the face, right? So I've never been one to have like the every single step of the way plan, but we did have the intention for it. When opportunities came up to explore that, we began to take those meetings and have those conversations.
How did you grow from a startup to over a dozen employees? How did you do that with the building? Because one of the things we talk about on this show is, when you start a startup, there's lots of generalists. Everyone's mucking in, and they're doing a little bit of advertising, a little bit of marketing, a little bit of finance, HR, whatever they need to do to make the company work. By getting the employees and building that up, did you start systemizing? Did you start designating roles for people? And what was that transition like for your employees?
It was difficult. You said generalist before. You have to be a generalist when you're starting that type of business, because you have to do everything. I have to do business development. I have to do our own marketing and accounting and bookkeeping and everything else. I have to do client relations. I have to do creative direction. I have to do vendor management, all these different pieces. So you go from being a bunch of generalists to saying, well, you have to start hiring specialists if you want to grow in different categories. But the way you do it is you have to just continue embracing different levels of discomfort. So the first employee that you get, let's say you're one person, you run your business. I had a couple of partners, but you say one person running a business. The first employee you get is going to immediately decrease your salary, because if you don't hire that employee, every dollar you're going to pay them is going to go into your pocket. Maybe some goes in, maybe you don't make all of it. Maybe some goes to taxes, contractors, whatever. But almost every dollar that you're paying that employee goes into your pocket. But you're betting when you hire that employee that you're going to be able to make more money later on because of that you're going to it's going to empower you to do other stuff and to offload work to them or whatever it is. It gets easier of each employee, right? You're two people, you add one other person, is 50%. You add one other person after that, it's 33%. You went after that, it's 16.5%. And so it gets easier as you go, because each individual salary doesn't represent that much of a hit in terms of how much money you have. But that first employee is a really tough decision, because you're saying, well, you're also determining at that point, are you going to be a business that is employer, or first of all, or a business that was a solopreneur? I'll tell you now, after running that business, that I can see, I didn't want to be just one guy, one man band doing that stuff. I could see the benefit of it now. I can see why people are really interested in doing that. And that's become this increasing movement of like solopreneurship. And I've seen this because you don't have to pay for the payroll, you don't have to pay for the insurance, you don't have to pay for the rent, all these things that start to eat into your pocket. You can only grow so big by yourself, but there are plenty of businesses that make lots and lots of money as an individual. So it's an important conversation to have internally or with your partners, is where do you want to do it to begin with, and then acknowledging that you're going to have some difficulties along the way.
And did you employ people in an office, or did you do remote working at that time?
We had hybrid from the very beginning. We had an office from the very beginning, which was a fortunate byproduct of the relationship we had with our old professor. But eventually we moved into an office here in Queens and in New York City. We grew into a bigger office a few years later, and we had separate offices. We had a conference room, we had a bullpen, we had all the stuff, all the trappings of an office. And it costs money, right? Like, it's expensive to manage and to pay rent and utilities and everything else for an office. But I will say, and it's a little bit different now in 2023 than it was in 2015 when we got our first office. Yeah. I will say it was beneficial. It did make us more money probably to have that office, because we would deal with a client, and even just the act of saying, do you want to come to our office, or should we go to your office for a meeting? It makes you seem more real, because in our industry of being a marketing person, and if you're a designer, if you're a developer, whatever, anything in this kind of professional services space, there's plenty of people who they just start a quote unquote business, but it's just them out of a coffee shop or at home doing something. And there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes clients, especially larger clients, will want to see that you are this like stable, legitimate company that they're hiring. And we ended up working with a lot of big brands that way over the years, because they liked the idea that we were a quote unquote real business that had an office and that had our logo up on the wall and had a mailing address and all these different things of business, which some of the critics of that style will say are superfluous. But I did find that it didn't help our bottom line as much, but it helped our top line a lot to have that it's not a facade, but to have that presence.
Yeah. How did you diversify your clients from an ice cream parlor to NFL and Comcast and people like that? There's obviously a journey in between there, but how did you bridge that gap from starting with very small localized businesses up to national and global companies?
Yeah, it's big, borrow and steal, right? So if you're in this business, if you're in any sort of professional services, client services business, you have to be constantly figuring out your way to get your foot in the door, get an introduction, start to position yourself so that you can get the next client, you can get the next one up the ladder that you want to get. I've met people that set up a website for their agency, and they think that everything's just going to roll in, it's just going to happen. But you have paradox. We ran a digital marketing agency. We would spend millions of dollars on Facebook ads for clients, or LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever the platform of the moment was. But we didn't do it almost any of that for ourselves. We had a tiny bit running in the background on Google and stuff, but that wasn't how we made our money, because the most important thing we could do is to meet somebody. And if that means going to an event, joining a board, just getting an introduction somewhere, all of those things were way more important than some random person clicking a link on Google. We had some business coming through our own kind of search, but most of the time, if you're in a big client, if you are the NFL, you are all of New York, you're not Googling for like website agency. You're asking other people that you know for, hey, you guys over at other big organization, you guys just redid your mobile app. Who'd you use to do that? And they would say somebody, then they put a few names in for an RFP and it goes out that way. But trying to be very intentional about expanding your surface area of meeting people. That's the most important thing that you can do in this type of business.
So tell us, what were the things that meant that you could leverage to be able to go to national and global companies? Because you've said you got on boards, you went like maybe networking, you maybe connected with people. What were those steps? Because some of my listeners who are running businesses are probably working for regional clients, maybe national clients, but they want to upscale. What were those killer things, those steps that sometimes are not spoken about that were critical for that growth for you?
So I would say before all of that, like the foundational piece is in your own stuff on your website, in your proposals, in your decks, make sure that you're painting a picture of the type of business they would want to work with. And that sounds like no duh, right? But let's say you work with 10 clients, you work with the NFL, you work with Disney, you work with Nike, you work with Apple, and then you work with Joe's barbershop and Sally's pub and local dog walker and the local like restaurant, whatever it is. If you put all of those on your website, somebody's going to look and they're going to say, oh, well, this guy's worked with Coca-Cola and Nike and Disney, but they also worked with Sally's pub and Joe's barbershop. And it's like, who are they? Are they the kind of company that works with Coca-Cola and Disney? Or are they the kind of company that works with a local restaurant and the dog walker? And nothing is wrong with doing the small business stuff, obviously. I've known people that make a lot of money doing that. But if you want to go out for the big clients, you should only show the big clients on your website. It's better for you to have 3 or 4 logos that are like the top tier logos than to have 3 or 4 top tier ones and the lower ones and the lower ones. Same applies for media. If you've been in the New York Times or BBC or Wall Street Journal, you want to put those ones on your website, but you don't want to go then put like local alumni, like high school magazine. You don't want to do like those things don't help you. You want to, because again, somebody looks and they say, well, those other ones are a fluke. The New York Times is a fluke, CNN's a fluke. What actually they are the kind of company that ends up in the local whatever. So do those type of things. Try to build other social proof along the way. If you can find really great quotes from people, if you can find a ranking somehow that you can get your company in like we're the top 100 places to work, whatever it is. If you can find awards to get, every industry has different awards that you can go out and you can hunt. Some are very prestigious and it takes a lot of effort to win them and it's a big career accomplishment. But the dirty truth is, there's also plenty of award bodies out there that you can go and you can say, hey, we're going to enter our, this website we worked on in there. And like 50% of, and like literally like the rules of the award show is like 50% gets like an honorable mention or something like that, right? It might be like one platinum winner and you can go brag about that. But if you want to quickly put something in your website saying award-winning website design. And so all these things start to paint this picture before you even get out there and meet these other people. A company this is legitimate. We can go work with them. They're the real deal. Then looking at like the specific ways in which you start to get those other clients after that. I joined a board over here. It was like a local business development organization. And it happened to be in a neighborhood in New York City, Long Island City, that was very fast growing. And there's all sorts of interesting things going on. There's some big companies that are moving their headquarters here. And so they would join the board also. And I'd meet people during that. And I had to pay a couple $1,000s to be on this board. And it was great because it went to this organization that did great work. But also I'd go to this board meeting every month and I would meet with all these other executives there, and you're a peer of them. You're not somebody who's just coming and asking for money. You're somebody who's also a community leader and part of this organization. They're more likely to, when they have hey, we need a website. Do you know a guy? They would come to us for that. So put yourself in rooms and in groups that are full of the right type of people. And again, that sounds like obvious, but so many people just go, they're running a marketing agency, are just going to go to the marketing meetups, right? They're just going to go to the local chamber of commerce or something, which again is great for certain things. But if you're looking to get like the big shots, you're probably better off spending money and like going to the TED conference and spending that like 10 grand or whatever it's going to cost you for that trip. That's going to be better investment than the $100 it costs to go to the smaller things.
Yeah, makes sense. How did you approach customer retention, customer service for your clients, and also retaining clients? Because one of the things that a lot of people that I've spoken to that are growing their business, they don't think enough about keeping the customers cycling through the business and growing with you and needing extra services, cross-selling. How are you providing great customer care and retaining clients?
So we were very fortunate. We had a number of clients that worked with us for years and years. And that's a rarity in marketing. A lot of times they come and go. They work for a couple of years and they go to the next thing. We had we ran a business for 10 years. We had clients that were with us for 7 of them, which was great. We had employees that were with us for 7 or 8 years too, which is great. There's an author, Neil Gaiman, who you may have heard of. He had a convention speech. He had a convention speech he gave a number of years ago that I like to quote a lot, which is he's talking about writing and kind of creative work, but it applies to this business too, which is you can be 3 things. You could be on time, you could do good work, or you can be a pleasure to work with. But the thing is, you only have to be 2 of them.
Okay.
And you can do, so if you're a pleasure to work with, but you're on time, people put up with you being a bit of an asshole. If you do good work and you're on time, people put up with you being a bit of an asshole. Yeah. If you are on time, but you're really nice, people will put up with you doing so-so work. And if you do great work and you're really nice, people will put up with you with delays, right? And so I think that's really funny, and I think that's a good thing for a lot of folks in creative work or client services to internalize. But I think that's you want to do good work. That's table stakes, right? That's important in any career. But being really likable is incredibly important in this type of business, because it's entirely referrals. It's 90% of our business came in through referrals over the years. And so you want to be like a pleasure to work with. I think that was actually the strongest asset we had, was we were really good at managing those relationships. And we got invited to client weddings. We were at birthday parties. They came to our parties and stuff. A number of my old clients blurbed my book, which I'm so flattered about too. It's important to go above and beyond. And if a client is like, hey, my daughter has this side project, and you give her a call and give her advice about something, great. And we did that. Or some client had some other achievement some milestone or whatever. Cool, we're going to go send them a really nice bottle of whiskey or something like that. Right? And so going out of your way to be as delightful as possible really makes the difference, because then people who are out there deciding that pitch are going to be like, you know what, I really like that guy. Like, I have to spend a lot of time working with my agency, and I want to like the people that I'm dealing with. So if you can optimize towards, again, you got to do great work, but if you can optimize towards being a pleasure to work with, you're going to get very far.
I think that's really sound advice. Were you naturally a good leader, or did you have to learn on the job being a founder?
Oh man, I feel like a schmuck calling myself a good leader, right? I feel like that's the thing other people should call you. But I'll just say I have in my life had a number of experiences of where I've had a chance to be in a leadership position. I have tended to really thrive in them. And I took the stuff that I learned from those experiences when I was a student, when I was in other career paths, and all of them helped me in that position.
What's your view on risk, and has it changed from when you started the business to where you are now?
Well, when I started the business, I was 22, 23. I was a kid, right? I had nothing to lose. And actually, going back to my students, I tell them all the time, look, you have nothing to lose. You're used to making no money. You don't have, maybe, everybody's life is different, but you probably don't have a mortgage. You probably don't have kids. You probably don't have a spouse. You can go out and fail for like a year or two, and it won't make any difference. People are still going to go out, and if you really decide, hey, it's not for me, people will still hire that 24-year-old over the 22-year-old. It's not a big deal. And they'll appreciate the fact that you have 2 or 3 things you tried and failed, and they'll look at that as positive. At least the right people will. But I would say now, just for the natural order of things, being in my mid-30s now, I have a little more to lose. I have a lovely wife who we got married a number of years ago. We have a house and an apartment and all. Yeah, so there's a certain level of kind of golden handcuffs you get as you go on, which makes taking risk a little bit harder. But you still want to take it as much as you can. I heard somebody once describe it as you want to take risks without putting yourself at risk. And I think that's a really important way of doing it. If you can find a way to cover your bases and then take swings from there, that's the ideal play. That's where you really want to get to in business or in life, is to be able to take those risks, but that risk is not necessarily going to put you out on the street or something. And it takes a lot of work, and it's a very privileged place to be, but that's the strongest batting stance.
Yeah. What's the plans for the next 2 to 5 years?
Oh man, I don't know. I don't know. So this book comes out in just a few weeks here. It was really a excellent journey. If anybody's ever curious about writing something, I highly recommend it, as well as for teaching. If anybody's ever curious about teaching, I highly recommend it. Both of them have been wonderful experiences. And so I have my eye set on that, and making sure the book gets out and this message resonates with as many people as possible. Since I sold the business, I've been doing a number of consulting projects where I've worked with, sometimes as a fractional executive, sometimes as an outside consultant, sometimes as an advisor, sometimes as a collaborator. And I've enjoyed having the freedom to do stuff that's a little bit different than what I did for 10 years. Running a business is a ton of fun, and you get an abnormal amount of flexibility, especially in this type of business, to do interesting, weird things and side projects. But there's something about selling the business and having that extra, even level further of flexibility that I have enjoyed recently. I will say, if you're looking at me towards the end of that time span, 2, 3, 5 years down the line, I probably will be working on some other big thing at some point. Probably start another business. I don't exactly know what it might be. Maybe I'll join a team somewhere. But it's fun not knowing, which has been great.
Yeah. Look, we're coming to the end of the interview. I ask the same 6 questions to all my guests. They're quick-fire questions, so they don't necessarily need a quick-fire answer. But first question is, what's the best decision that you've made?
Best decision I made was going to Baruch College, which is now where I teach, way back when I was in high school. I'm a big fan of CUNY, City University of New York, which Baruch is a part of, which I think is the biggest engine for economic mobility in New York, in the United States, maybe in the world. The people that I met were incredible, top to bottom. I have some of my best friends that I went to school with, some of my business partners, people I worked with as clients, and of course my wife are people that I met there. And now as an alum and as a faculty member, I get to be a part of the community that way. So big fan of CUNY and a big fan of that decision I made however many years ago it was.
Amazing. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
Best piece of advice I've been given is something you'll actually find on like page 2 or 3 of the book, which is a bit of meta advice. All advice is autobiographical. So if somebody's giving you advice, they're not so much giving you advice as they're giving advice to themselves in the past. And if you put that lens on, it actually makes taking other people's advice to be a lot more productive, because you can say, well, okay, this one applies to me, this one doesn't, this one applies to me now, but it didn't apply to me before. All of that helps milk the most value out of other people's advice. Who's
helped you most in your career?
Everybody. I don't believe that anybody accomplishes anything on their own. I couldn't have run this business without my business partners. I couldn't have written this book without the people that helped put the book together at the publisher, my agent, with my wife helping me as love and support, my parents, all of these people, everybody that keeps the roads working and the hospitals and the teachers. I'm a believer that everything is interconnected. And so I'm grateful to everybody that makes this type of thing possible.
Amazing. Tell me about a regret that you have.
I don't typically spend a lot of time thinking about regrets. I have a couple projects that I wish I had a little bit more time to explore over the years. I mentioned side projects before when I was talking about running an agency, and that's a fun thing to do, but it's really hard because you're often debating, am I going to work on that side project? Am I work on this thing for a client that's paying me? And there were a couple projects that I thought were really neat ideas that for whatever reason, business picked up otherwise, and it was hard to devote the time to work on them. So now that I've sold the business, now I think I might want to explore a few of them again.
Amazing. So I'll be looking forward to seeing what those side projects are soon. What are you most proud of?
What am I most proud of? I think the entire business experience was something I'm very proud of. I think that the book is obviously something I'm very proud of. I mean, these are these like major keystone accomplishments. But really, the thing I'm that that the little things that make me really proud are when I get to talk to my students, and at the end of the semester, they say this was the best course they ever had, or the best professor they ever had, and it's a lot of flattery. Maybe because I haven't given them their grades yet, so that's maybe part of it. But when I see somebody who came in at the beginning of the semester with a little bit of confusion in their eyes and not quite knowing exactly what they want to do, and at some point over the course of the however many months we're together, something clicked and they decided hey, they're interested in this, they want to go pursue a different idea or path. And then especially when I get to catch up with them later on, because I keep in touch with a lot of my students, those are the little moments that make me exceptionally proud.
What does legacy mean to you?
Did you make anybody's life better while you're here? At the end of the day, and this is something my father used to say a lot, which is no matter how much you love what you do, no matter how good you are at the end of the day, after doing it for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, it's a job. And you have to go to work, and you have to go do that thing. And you can have a lot of fun doing it, but what makes it easier, what makes the length of dedication and work that you put in worth it, is at some point you made somebody's life a little bit better. And that's what I hope that I can do, because in a few hundred years, no one's going to remember us anyway. So if my presence here, my work here, in whatever capacity, can make somebody else's a little more pleasant, then I'll consider that a good legacy.
Great. And if people want to find out more about you or find out anything that you're giving away, or where should people go?
Absolutely. So you can go to benguttmann.com, BenGutmann. I joke that I talk about minimal in the book, but my name is not minimal. It has 2 T's and 2 N's. So make sure you get all of that. There you'll find an email that I send out every Tuesday, which is free, and I encourage you to sign up. And as well as everything about the book, you can go buy the book there. You can download the introduction for free, and you can keep in touch on that channel or connect to me on LinkedIn.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ben. It's been an absolute pleasure. I think you are the ideal person to speak to with this new format of show, which I'm building now, because you've been through the experience of starting a business, growing a business, and selling a business. And a lot of my people that are listening here, they might be at the first or the second stage, and maybe they're thinking about exiting, and you've given them some ideas about that. And equally, you've given ideas about how to grow a business and really elevate it to a very impressive state. So thank you, Ben. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I appreciate it, Mark. This has been a ton of fun.
Great. Right, guys, that was Ben. That was Ben Guttmann. Do look out for his book. So this is going to be released a day before the book is released on the 10th of October. Do check it out. It's called Simply Put, Why Clear Messages Win and How to Design Them. So I really thought that was a really fascinating conversation, ideal for this new show format, because he's started a business, he's grown a business, he's sold a business, he's been through all of the stages, apart from mature businesses like big corporates, but he's worked with those big corporates as well. Really impressive guy. I love that idea of simple messaging when it comes to marketing and advertising and messaging. I think a lot of companies, small, big, whatever, they struggle because they overcomplicate, or they talk about features. And some people, a lot of people, most people don't care about the features. Yes, they want their phone to work. Yes, they want their laptop to be fast and have decent storage. But and that's why Apple have been so successful, because they tap into that connection between a person and their technology. So Apple is a great example. But yeah, it's a great book. I really recommend it. Hopefully you enjoyed that episode. I really think that thinking about that whole idea of exiting businesses. So something that I've been thinking about after speaking to a couple of my guests. What would be my exit of my podcast agency? And for me, it's not necessarily selling it at the moment. It's to create it automated to the point where I have some like board responsibilities or some sort of responsibilities, but the actual operational side is being run by someone else. So thinking about that exit, if you are an entrepreneur, business owner, and you're thinking about growing, sometimes thinking about that exit is super important to work out where you want to be in that sort of 2, 5, 10 years time. So that was really interesting. Put him on the spot, asking if he was a good leader. I was thinking, like, was he going to say it's something that I've had to develop, I've had to think about, had to learn to be able to be a better leader? And I think as leaders, you should be thinking about self-development, and leadership is something that you can get better at as a leader. And it's really fascinating that Ben has been through that whole process, 10 years in a digital marketing agency, and been able to work with the biggest clients in the US, and really been impressive. Hopefully you enjoyed some of those tidbits, those tips on thinking about awards, getting on award ceremony things, and getting on boards as well, and meeting the right people. Often networking when you're a small business is a really good way of doing it, and I think it is a really valuable way of doing it. But just think about those other things that give you credibility. So I thought of awards, something that we're aware of, but I hadn't thought of boards, and actually being on a board and being a peer to other executives, I think is a super way, and something that I've not heard before on this podcast. So that's a little tip for you if you're looking to be able to build that business and get to larger businesses, larger clients. That might be a really invaluable little hint and tip that he's been able to give. So that's it for me at the moment. Hopefully you're enjoying these reflection points as well. I'm enjoying it, just to give my sort of instant reaction to having those shows with people, and hopefully you're enjoying it. Please do subscribe to the podcast on all different platforms. You won't miss an episode if you subscribe. Thank you so much for your time, and have a lovely day.
Thank you for listening to Business Growth Talks. This podcast is released every Monday, so don't miss an episode by subscribing to all podcast platforms including Apple and Spotify. Have a great day.